And now, as you know, when you execute Java programs, there may be errors. Like now, we don't know because we're gonna get these two numbers from the user. Now, let's say we are implementing a small calculator, and then we need to get two inputs from the user, and then we need to perform division. Right? Then we don't know what the user will enter. Right now, let's say now let me scan as well. Then let's say I don't know what the let's say I'm gonna ask you to enter a number. Right. Mm. Right now, I'm saying input a number, but then I'm gonna take the input, scan object dot. I'm gonna convert into an integer, and I'm gonna display the number. Right. Now, when I run this program, here you will see now when you say 10, it will display number as 10. Right. But now, by any chance, if I have entered, like, let's say 1.5, 1.6, now you can see the program has stopped. And then I throw an exception because it says input a number. Now I have inserted a number because it says input a number. Then I have input a number, which is 1.6. But the program got stopped. Now saying that input mismatch exception, because when you're writing the code, when you're executing the code, there may be different errors. Therefore, like if it is a code error, right now, that might due to a code error. That means we may have made a mistake, and then that's why the error occurs because of the mistake of a program. So now like this, due to a wrong input, now you are expected to enter a number, but you have entered a number, but then you have entered 1.6, but then the program is accepting one integer value, then it gave us an error. Yes, then wrong input. Or there may be any other issue which you haven't seen. Sometimes the database service is not running, or sometimes you are trying to read a file. Now the file is not available. Likewise, then you may try to like read a file. The file is not available. Likewise, then the errors may happen due to mistakes, the mistakes of the coder or the programmer, or the invalid input types, or other like whatever the things you cannot see or you haven't seen unforeseeable events. Therefore, now normally when error occurs, right now the Java normally stop the program and display the error message. Now that's what happens. Previously, it stopped the program, it gave us the error. Then actually what is happening is now when an error occurs, that means now here when you run this program, when an error occurs, right now, yeah, when an error occurs, now we say exception has been thrown. The technically what you have to call is exception thrown. Exception has thrown. Now because it has thrown an error. Therefore Java will throw an exception or Java will throw an error. Therefore in Java like now we can have uh, exception handling. Therefore first you need to know what is the exception and what is exception handling. Right. Now exception means right now when exception means which is an event which will stop which will disrupt the normal flow. Therefore, it will interrupt the normal flow. Therefore, it will throw an exception. Therefore, exception handling means if you have a mechanism to handle the thrown exceptions, when an exception is thrown, if you have uh, a mechanism in play to handle it, then that's what you call as exception handling. Now, let's say how to handle the exception. Right now, first of all, when it comes to exceptions, right now, exceptions comes under throwable class. Java has a Java language throwable class, and under the throwable class, we have exception and the error. Exception and the error. Then, if it is an error which is not recoverable, you cannot recover because, like, it may be a virtual machine error. If it is there's an error in the JVM, then you cannot recover it. Out of memory error. Likewise, if those errors occur, then those are not recoverable. But if it's an exception, then you can mainly have two type of exceptions: checked exceptions and unchecked exception. Checked exception and the unchecked exceptions. Like now, mainly you can have three types. We have the error, we have the checked exception, and then we have the unchecked exception. Right? Errors, checked exception, and the unchecked exceptions. Therefore, now we have error, checked exception, unchecked exception. Therefore, now these are the main type of exceptions. Like you can see, checked and unchecked exceptions are the main two types of exceptions. Now, error also considered as unchecked exception, but now when it comes to a error, like most of errors are not recoverable. Right. Now, the checked exception means if it is a checked exception, means now this also inherit from the throwable class, and this you call as a runtime exception. Therefore, this could be input-output exception or SQL exceptions, and these may be checked at the compile time. These checked exceptions checked at the compile time. Checked exceptions are checked at the compile time, and unchecked exceptions now checked during the or during the runtime. Right now here arithmetic exception, like you have to do a division and then division by 0. Now you don't know it because you can't control because what user gonna enter. Then this can happen during the runtime. Therefore, checked exceptions you can call as compile time exception, and unchecked exceptions you can say those are runtime exceptions. Right now, for an example, if it is a runtime exception, now you can say division by 0, and input mismatch, inherit file types. Likewise, then you can say uh, unchecked exceptions. If it is a checked exception, now it could be a SQL exception, or it could be like now you are trying to access a database. Therefore, now it will ask you to put that inside the try catch block because now it's a checked exception, right? Therefore, now we know when the exceptions are happening, what are the exceptions, like as a summary. Now, Java exception, you can say exception means interruption to the normal flow. Therefore, that happens during the execution of a program. That happens that means it will disrupt the normal flow. Therefore, when there's an exception, right, the program will stop and exception will thrown. Therefore, exception can be caught and handled by the program. Therefore, when an exception occurs within a method, it will create an exception object, and then that object will get thrown. Right. Therefore, exceptions are happening due to invalid user inputs, and maybe the virtual memory or the device failure, or like you are trying to access like a database which is like in a different place. Therefore, lots of network connectivity. Right now, there are good old bugs in the code. Right now, you are trying to access a file which is not available. Likewise, in those scenarios, exceptions may happen. Therefore, we said that in Java there are three type of errors. Okay, exceptions. You can say error, checked exception, unchecked exception. If it is an error, that means if it is an error, error indicates that's a serious event which we cannot be able to recover. Therefore, error indicates that we cannot recover it. It is irrecoverable condition, error. Right now, for an example, if the Java virtual machine fails, or out of memory error, then those are cannot be recovered. Therefore, error means right now you can say irrecoverable exceptions. And then we have checked exceptions and the unchecked exceptions. Checked exceptions means compiler time exceptions, or these will be checked during the compiler time. That means at the time you compile, it will be checked for the code will be checked for the checked exception. And if it is an unchecked exception means now it would be happen during the runtime, therefore, which we don't know. Therefore, based on the user inputs, based on the file availability or unavailability, based on the network connectivity, this may happen. Therefore, now this unchecked exceptions happens during the runtime. Right. Therefore, now we know how the behavior and when it happens likewise. Right. Now, let me show you the slides quickly. Exceptions and assertions. Exceptions means, let's clear this first. Right, something has gone wrong. That's why exception object will get thrown. Therefore, it might be a hardware failure, resource exhaustion, or good old bug. Therefore, handling the exception is done by transferring the execution of a program to an appropriate exception handler. Therefore, when an exceptional event occurs in Java, that is said as exception has thrown. Exception has thrown. As I said, there are three types: checked, unchecked, and errors. Checked means but that is the class which extends the throwable class except the runtime exception. And error are known as checked exception. Error is also a checked exception. And input output exception, SQL exception, we can call it as a checked exceptions. And these are checked at the compiler time. Unchecked exception means that also extend the runtime exception class, and you can see arithmetic exception, null point exception, array index out of bound, array out of bounds exception, string index out of bounds exception. Likewise, you can see there are many unchecked exceptions. And these are checked during the runtime, and these are not checked at the compiler time. Error means which you cannot be able to recover if an error occurs. Right. Now there are different type of exceptions. Now let's see how to handle the exceptions, and then what are the type of exceptions. Right. Right. Then let's say arithmetic exception. Let's try this one. Right now you have the input number, and based on the number now you have taken. Now what you're gonna do is I'm gonna result. Let's say I'm going to divide 10 by that particular number. Now, if you type 2 as input, now you'll see 10 divided by 2 as 5. By any chance, if you are given 0 as the input, now this will throw an exception because you have given a correct number, but the problem is when you try to divide by 0, Java throws an exception called arithmetic exception. And now we know to handle this exception, and now you can use the try catch blocks right now. Therefore, now this is where you will the error may comes. Therefore, you know that the place. Therefore, if you're not sure what will happen here, therefore you could put that inside a try block. You could put that inside a try block, and then once you open the try brackets, then here you have to close it, and just after the try block, you need to have the catch clause. Inside the catch clause, you need to have the type of exception handler. Now here I'm looking for an arithmetic exception. Therefore, I'm gonna use the arithmetic exception type. Arithmetic exception is a subtype of the exception class. Now I'm going to create a object of the arithmetic exception as well, because if there's an now you know that when an exception is thrown, that means when there's an error, then there will be an object from that particular error type will get created and that will be thrown. Therefore, if it is thrown an exception now, then from this handler, if it is the same type, then this handler will catch it and stored inside this variable, assigned to this variable. Thereafter, now we can read the exception details and everything from this object, because that object get assigned the exception object thrown, right? Thereafter here, when you handle this, whatever you want to do, you can write it. Now you can say e dot get message, and now which will return the detailed message string of this throwable, right? And then if you want anything, you could handle. Right now, if you run this program now, if you enter 0, now you will see, now here it will display 0 by divide by 0 and end. That means afterwards, now this will rather stopping the program. This will, when an exception is thrown here, without displaying this, now it has gone into the catch clause and then it is executing this. And afterwards, now you can see here, and now even after printing the division by 0 and then out of the main, that means here, now the rather stopping the program. Now here at this point, exception has been thrown. Therefore, the particular handler has handled it. Then it throws this exception type, and then it releases the end. Afterwards, it displays out of the main as well, because now rather stopping the program, you can see you can handle the exception using this flow. Okay, quickly try this. What else like you can use abstract trace as well. You can see here it will give you at line number 21 this particular package, this particular file in the main method at this line number. In the file test.java, you have the issue and exception has thrown. Likewise, you can find the details. Right. Right now, have a string variable and try to get the length of the string variable. Have a string variable and try to get the length of that particular string variable. Now the next thing is very easy. Now when you have, let's say, a string variable, the string s, and then if you try to print the, let's say, s dot length, you are trying to print the s dot length. Right. Now you can see here, you will get an error saying it's a local variable, therefore you have not initialized. Okay, let me assign this as now. But now if you run this program, now what will happen here is, now we have a string variable which is null, and I'm going to print the length. Then you will see you get exception saying null point exception because it's null. Now the problem here is, even though we have put the try catch block, now the exception handler here what I have used cannot handle this particular exception because it is throwing a null pointer exception. Since it is throwing a null pointer exception, arithmetic exception cannot handle the null pointer exception. Therefore, if you want to handle the null point exception, then you need to have the null point exception handler. Otherwise, you cannot handle it. Now, this time I have changed the code into null point exception. Now, this would handle the exception because null point exception can handle the null point exceptions. Now, you can see here there's an error, null point exception happened at the code in the test file.java in the main method in the line number 21. Now you can see here. Now this is line number 21 here. Now at the line number 21, here this array occurs. Now that's what it says, and thereafter it brings end and it brings out of the main method as well. Right. Okay, now try to get the value and try to get an input from the user and then try to convert it to a number, or try to get a you are trying to getting an okay, we have tried that one. We are trying to get an integer number and then if you enter a decimal value, we get input mismatch exception. We have tried it now. Okay, let's say you have a string variable and then try to convert that into an integer. Try to convert that into an integer. And let's see what is the exception you are getting. And also create an array of size 5 and try to get the fifth index value. Okay, quickly try out. Right now, let's say now we have the string contains 3. Okay, if it is number 3, it's fine. And okay, 23. And if you try to convert that into an integer, equals integer dot parseInt, and you can pass this. Right. Now you can see here when you run this program now here it's going to convert this 23 into Now we're going to convert this 23 into a integer value. Okay, let's run it and see. Right. Now you can see here there's a variable called j, and then you are trying to convert integer to pass it. Yes, no worries, because you can do it. Because why? Because just 23. Right now I'm going to say 1. I'm going to pass it as 1. And then if you're trying to convert the word 1 or any to an integer value, which is not possible. Now this will throw an exception. What is the exception? Yes, it says number format exception. The number format exception is cannot handle by the null point exception. Therefore, if you want to have the number format exception, then you need to have the number format exception type. Otherwise, you cannot handle it. Therefore, number format exception. Well, now, this will be handled by the number format exception. Okay. Now, in the same way, you could read the string character. You can access the characters using chart method. String.chart. Okay, try to get the third index of the this s variable. Third index of the third index character of the variable s. Let's say now I'm gonna get the third index character. Then s dot char at third index. Now I'm going to try to access the third index character, but you know that there's only 3 letters or any indexes are starting from 0. Therefore, there is no such index. Now again, you will get a string index out of range. Therefore, now here you have to handle it by the string index out of range. The string out of bound exception. Now, this time this will get handled. This particular type of errors, the exception, if an exception thrown by the string index out of exception, now that can be handled by this string index out of bound exception. Now you can see here in line number 21, this has happened. The string index out of bound exception. Now this message get printed just because of we are printing the stack trace. Now because we wanted to see what has happened actually. Right. Now my next question was to have an array int arr 10 and 20. Right. Then the string will be now for the array also, now I'm gonna say array third index value and second index value is equals to 50. I'm going to write the array second index value as 50. Now when I run this, now you can see here this might throwing an exception, but that can be handled by the string index out of bound exception. Right now, let me run this. Now you can see string index out of bound exception cannot handle this exception thrown, which is array index out of bound exception. Therefore, if you want to handle this, then you need to have the array index outer bound exception. Now then only you'll be able to handle. But then string index outer bound and array index outer bound are subtypes of the index outer bound exception class. Therefore, rather defining array index outer bound exception, you can have it as an index outer bound exception. If this throws an exception, no worries, that would handle by the index outer bound exception, because anyway that is a subtype of the index outer bound exception. Right now, see, error thrown is array index outer bound exception. Let me comment this line. Now this string, throw an string index outer bound exception, that also can be handled by the index outer bound exception. Also, now rather having index outer bound exception, you can have defined the super type of the super class of the exception, which is the exception. Therefore, no matter whatever the exception is going to throw, then exception class exception can handle, because exception means super type. Therefore, whatever the exceptions it's going to throw during this inside the try block is a subtype of the exception class. Therefore, that can be handled by the exception. Therefore, if you are not sure which part may throw an exception or which exception may throw, rather defining multiple exceptions, we can define exception. Oh yes, now let's say you are asking user to enter number, enter input, and you're going to get the input. In j equals scanner dot next, and thereafter you are trying to convert that into a okay. Right now you have this, and then from this you're going to perform a division, and thereafter you're going to display the array jth index. Display the array jth index. Right. Therefore, now, okay, if you are not sure what type of exception may throw, therefore now you can do it is initially the first line, if it is input mismatch, you can have input mismatch exception. And if it is an error, like let's say now here, I'm going to display input error. Right. And also, if you are not sure about this second line, then if it is use integer, and then when you're trying to divide, then this might throw an array in arithmetic exception, division by 0. Therefore, arithmetic exception, you can handle it. And thereafter, you can see like you are an array, you are trying to access this particular index. You don't know array has only 2 values, therefore, whatever the index user going to access we do. Therefore, here we can have array index outer bound exception. Okay, now you can see now this is how we can handle the exceptions this program may throw. Now when user enters 1, let's say no problem, the program works perfect. But if user enters 0, okay, if the user enters 1.5, now you can see it gives you an input error. Right now here, divide, division, and index. Now it will say input error if user enters a decimal number, or if user enters a 0. If user enters 0, then you will get this particular division by 0, arithmetic exception division by 0. And even if user enters 2, user enters 2, now you can see index error, because now you are trying to access the other two is fine, perfect, but then you are trying to access the second index error, but there's no second index error. Therefore, either you could use multiple catch clauses. Therefore, if you rather using the multiple catch clauses, if you wish, you can handle everything by here, the exception. Okay, try this one quickly. Right, now we done this arithmetic exception, argument exception. number format, array index outer bound, and then we have used handling exceptions. Okay, now rather using try with multiple catches or like with the try and catch, you could use a finally block as well. Right now, if you use the finally block, what's going to happen? If you use the finally block also, if you are using, but remember, if you are using a finally with try and catch blocks, then at the end, you need to have the finally. If you are using the finally block, remember whether the exception has been occurred or whether exception has been thrown or not, the finally block will get executed. Therefore, if there's an exception has happened or not, this is gonna give you the this will the finally block will get executed. Now you can see if you enter one, right? Then no values, no exceptions has been thrown, but you can see it says finally here. Right now, if I have, let's say if I have put 0, now that means division by 0 should happen. Therefore, if I type 0, I can see division by 0 has happened, but again, it would display finally. Therefore, if you want, you could use try catch clauses with finally, or if you want, try without any catch finally. You can have try with finally. Therefore, if you are using a try block must follow by a catch clause or a finally block. If you are using try, catch, and finally, then first the try block, then the catch, and at the end you have the finally block. Remember, it is a must. If you are using a finally block should come after the last catch clause. If there is no catch clauses after the try clause. You cannot use try clause without catch or without finally. Either catch clause or finally clause should be there after the try. If you are using try catch, then try catch. Finally, you need to have the finally block. Now remember, this is how we can use finally, and it is legal to use a try clause without a catch clause or a finally. Without it is illegal to use a try clause without a catch or finally. You have to use it's a must. Try should be followed by a catch or finally. If you are using one, then try catch finally. If there is no catch, then try finally. A try clause by itself will result in a compiler. Therefore, any catch clause must immediately follow the try clause. Any finally clause must immediately follow the last catch clause. Or it should follow the try clause. Because it is legal to omit either catch or finally, but you cannot omit both. Okay, you know that exception is from the Java language exception class. When an exception is thrown, that means object of a particular type is instantiated and handed to the exception handler as an argument to the catch clause. Therefore, now in the catch clause, you have the exception type and object you created. That is to initialize that E object. Now here you have array index outer bound exception E. That means E is the object name. That is to if there's an exception thrown inside the try block to get store the thrown object. Now this is what we discussed. Java language object is the superclass. Then we have throwable class. Throwable, we have exceptions and the errors. If it is an error which cannot be recovered, if it is an exception, now you can see we have checked exception and unchecked exception. Checked exception, checked during the compile time, but unchecked exceptions happens during the runtime. Therefore, IO input output exception, SQL exception, those are the checked exception, right? and unchecked exception, arithmetic exception, null point exception, number format exception, input mismatch exception, index out of bound exception. Likewise, you can see runtime exception. Okay, write a program to get two inputs from the user. Okay, now let me show. Okay, now here this is the main method. No? Okay, right now create a class called. Okay, now you have the main method. Inside the main method, okay, call calculator class by passing two numbers x and y, and there should be another class called what my code class my code. There is a class my code, and this inside this we have class called cal. We have the class called cal. We are accepting integer x and integer y, and inside this cal get have a method called division, get ratio, and we're gonna pass x and y here, and there should be another method called get ratio. Now here you're gonna have the division. Okay, get ratio method, define the get ratio method here. Have the code here. Right? That means you need to add another class called my code. Inside the my code, there are two methods. This is cal method and cal method for the get ratio method, get radio here, perform the division. So quickly done this, complete this and let me know. Right, then, okay, now here, how to do this? Okay, we wanted to have another class, right? Yes. Then add another class for my code. And inside the my code class, we need to have a method called, let's say, object void cal, which takes two values, x and y, and then here, this is gonna call the method called get ratio. Get ratio, and then here we're gonna, let's say, divide x by y. We're gonna divide x by y here, and then here we're gonna call the method get ratio by passing x and y. And inside the test class here, and here what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna call this inside the try block. Right. Okay. Let's create a class. My class object, my code, first name, my code, and then I'm gonna call the method here. Let's try and find it. I'm gonna call the object c dot cal by passing 10 and 20. 10 and 20. Right. Now if I run this now, this will call the my code cal class and the cal class call the get ratio. Right now, this is how the call stack develops right now. Initially, we're gonna call the now main method. Now we're gonna call the main method and on top of the main method now we're gonna call the cal method and then the cal method calls the get ratio method. Cal method called the get ratio method. Now this is how method stack looks like. At the bottom you have the main which is the beginning class, and then you have the cal class, and then the get ratio method. Right then, without any issues, since 10 and 2 we have passed, it gives us the 5 as the answer. Right now, let me pass the value as 0, 10 and 0. Now, if I pass 10 and 0, now this would be, now we are passing 10 and 0. Now, here, 10 divided by 0 will result in arithmetic exception. Therefore, this will throw an exception, arithmetic exception. Therefore, now here, since there is no exception handler, now what happens is the get ratio method here will throw the exception. Therefore, that will come to the cal method, because that is where it got invoked. And the cal method, there is no try catch block, no exception handler. Therefore, that could return back to the main method. And the main method, there is no exception handler. Therefore, that would uh, send that would display it. That would be the exception would be thrown. Now that's what's going to happen. Therefore, if you put that inside the try catch, if you put this inside the try catch block, now let's say now I'm going to remove the bracket here. Let's say after now catch close, exception E, then I'm going to call the stack trace as well. print trace. Right. Now what's going to happen is now, since there is a exception handler placed at the main class. Therefore, once the exception object pass from get ratio method to cal and cal to main, now then the main method will handle it, and then you can see it will show you division by zero exception happen. Now this is the now you can see the trace. Now that happened on line number 18. My code got get ratio. Now my code got get ratio. My code is a class name. This is where the exception thrown, and then it has been passed to the cal method. Then at the cal method, my code.cal method line number 40. Now this is where again the exception has been passed. Then exception object passed to the main method, and then in the main method, now here it returned back to here. Then line number 19 at code test, the test class main method at line number 19. Now this is how the exception object has been passed. Right. Okay. Right. Then the call stack I have explained. The last method call is at the top of the stack, while the first calling method at the bottom. That's what we had main call, main cal get ratio, and then handling the exception of the hierarchy that also we discussed, because index out of bound and the string index out of bound are the subtypes of the index out of bound exception. Therefore, rather using both exception handlers, we could use only index out of bound exception. Right, now this also we have discussed. Exception matching. Now when an exception is thrown, Java will try to find the available catch clause from the top down. If we have multiple catch clauses for the exception type, if it doesn't find one, it will search for a handler for a super type of the exception. If it does not find a catch clause that matches a super type for the exception, then exception is propagated down the call stack. Okay, let's see that. That can be checked using this. Okay, let's have the catch. Now inside the get ratio method, let's say now we're gonna put this inside the try block. Now here I'm gonna have the exception type as input mismatch exception. Okay, now this is what I'm gonna do inside this. Here I'm gonna have the here I'm gonna have the exception type like index outer bound exception. And here I'm gonna have first I'm gonna have null point exception. Okay, number format exception, null point exception, and then number format exception, and then I'm going to have index arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception. If none of these exception handlers works, then I'm going to have the super type of the exception as well. Right now, we know to identify that this particular exception handler has been executed. Rather displaying the stack trace. Okay, let's print here the index. rather displaying the stack trace, we'll display the here we're going to say input mismatch, input index, and then here null pointer. Number format, arithmetic exception, and then here it's a exception. Now you can see we have multiple exception handlers placed in, but now here I'm gonna throw the exception arithmetic exception division by 0 here, but that cannot be handled by here the input mismatch, index out of bound, and then null pointer, number format. Only the arithmetic exception can handle, or else the exception superclass can handle. Now let's see what can happen. Now this is what you call as the exception matching. Now when an exception is thrown, Java will try to find by looking at the available catch clause. Right now you can see it displays arithmetic. That means arithmetic means at here it has been handled. Now what happens? Here the exception has now at this line the exception has been thrown, the object has been thrown, and there is a try catch block. It checked here, but then this input handler cannot handle it. Therefore, it passed to the calling method, the cal method. There is a try catch block that index outer bound cannot handle division by 0 exception type. Therefore, again that object has been passed to the here to the main method here. There's a try block, and then the immediate catch clause is null point exception that cannot handle the arithmetic exception. Therefore, that will go down, and then number format exception again that cannot handle. Therefore, now it comes to arithmetic exception. Yes, arithmetic exception handler can handle the arithmetic exception object. Therefore, now this get assigned by the object passed from this get ratio method, and then here it will display arithmetic. Therefore, this is what you call as the exception matching. We quickly try out exception matching as well. Any questions, please ask. Okay, then we know about exception matching, and yes, that's what we discussed. Right, then right now, if you want to right now, okay, if you want to exception when you want to declare, that means if you do not use the exception handlers, that means if you do not use the try catch block, now either you can define, then the exceptions might be thrown. Therefore, exceptions that a method can throw must be declared, right? Unless it is a type of the subclass of runtime exception. Therefore, if we are saying this method might throw an exception, that means if we are writing your own method and that method may throw user defined exceptions, then you have to declare it, because if the exceptions that a method can throw must be declared unless it is a subtype of the runtime exception. Runtime exception means previously we have discussed unchecked exceptions. Unchecked exceptions, that means null pointer, arithmetic exception, array index out of bound exception, likewise we have discussed so far. Right. Now, if it is not a subtype of the runtime exceptions, then that has to be declared. Therefore, you need to declare in the method public interface saying this method may throws exceptions. Therefore, throws keyword is used to declare exceptions thrown. That means throws keyword is used to follow to list the exception that a method can throw. Therefore, remember, if there is no matching try-catch block to handle this particular exception, therefore the exception is propagated down the stack, and then if there is no handler is available, therefore it will throw an exception. Right. Okay, now let's try how to have our own exceptions and how to define those. Right. Therefore, checked exceptions, you know the non-runtime exceptions we call as a checked exception. Error is also check type of checked exception, but right, SQL exceptions, input-output exceptions are called as the checked exceptions because this has been checked during the runtime. Therefore, now you need to have the handle the checked exception before you compile. Right. That means that each method must either handle all checked exception by supplying a catch clause or list each unhandled checked exception as a thrown exception. Uh, if you are not using exception handler, then you need to declare that this will throw an exception. Right. Okay. Then let's say now let's try to define your own exception. Right. Now your own exception. Right. How can you do it? Right. Now inside this, let's say now we'll have another class called another class. My exception. Okay. My exception. The class is my exception, and my exception class gonna extend the exception class. Now it is a subclass of the exception. Now my exception is a type of a subtype of the exception class. Right now let's try to declare exception. Right now, okay, then in order to declare an exception, now let's say we have the constructor for this. Right click, insert code, constructor, exception. Right now, we're gonna pass a string variable, let's say s, and then you're gonna pass this the parameter whatever we have passed to the superclass as well. But now this is our my exception. Right. Okay, now here inside my test class, let's say. Right now, I don't need the my code inside the test class here. I'm gonna say, mm, mm, mm. Let's say now here we're gonna do what? We're gonna call the c dot cal. Okay, bypass into values 10 and 50. Right now, inside the my code, now let's say we have the cal method. In the cal method, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check now this method. If this method is, if the values we have passed, if not the same, if x is not t equals to y, if x is not t equals to y, if x is not t equals to y, this is gonna return if x is not t equals to y. This is gonna return. It's gonna say throw new exception. Right now we're gonna have Joe new, and we have the type of exception is my exception. Throw new my exception. Saying the message also be passed. What we're gonna say? Custom not t not t not t Right now, this is the text I have declared, not the equal exception. Right? We cannot just throw the exception as we discussed previously unless we declare it. Now, this method gonna throw an exception. Therefore, we have to declare it. This is not a runtime exception. This is a custom user-made exception. Therefore, we need to say this method may throw what? This gonna throw my exceptions. Now, this gonna throw uh, my type exception. This gonna not throws my exception. Now this method gonna throw a my exception type exceptions. Therefore, now this method may if x and y are not equal, this gonna throw say exception saying not equal of values. Not equal values exception. Otherwise, it's gonna say what? X and y are the same. X equals what? It's gonna just say x equals what? Right. Okay, now this one is sorry. Okay, now what happens here is we have declared the exception, which is a subtype of the exception, right? And then we have the test class, which call the cal method. Cal method gonna uh, cal method gonna throw the exception if the values are not the same. Right. Let's run it and see. Okay, now here there's another compilation error. What would be okay? Now it says unreported exception code. My exception must be code or declared to be thrown. Right. Now why is it must be thrown or declared to be right now when you're calling this method, it's unreported exception. My exception must be code or declared to be true. We have declared it to those the exception.
Yes, yes, yes. The problem here is we have not handled it. Yes, Now we have to handle it. We have forgot the try catch flow. Try and the catch close. Right now, catch close, you can have my exception type objective. On here, need a print struct trace. Yes. Right now, here, this is the type that even you can have the super type of exception as well. Like when you run this program now, you can say it will say code my exception, but not t equal values exception. Because now here it's gonna throw now user declared the exception. Now we have declared the exception, which is my exception, right? Which is subtype of the superclass exception. And then what happens here, we have passed the text not equal value exception. If the two values are not the same, then this will thrown here. Now this method throws my exception. Now that's why here we have declared this method throws my exception. That's why here we had the error without try block. Without the try block, we had this issue just because of now if you are since we have already declared the cal method is throwing an exception. Therefore, we have not handled it. Therefore, that is not a subtype of the runtime exception. That's why here we have to put this inside the try catch block. That's how you handle your own exception. Right now, quickly write a program, a method to check whether the given number is odd number. If it is an odd number, throw an exception saying odd number exception. You quickly do it. Throw an exception saying odd number exception. You quickly do it. Right now, in order to do this again, if you want to check like now, even the same method we'll say, if the number is not odd, you have to change it. If it is an odd number, you have to throw an exception. Now, this is how you can have your own exceptions, customer defined or the user defined exceptions. Right now, that's how you declare user defined exceptions. Right. And also in Java, there is an assertions as well. Now, by default, assertions are disabled. In assertions, right now, when you use the assertions, that means it is used to check the assumptions. It is used to check the assumptions. Now, assertions are used to check the assumptions right now. Therefore, that means if you make an assumption, that means uh, when a value you get, for an example, for this method a, if you, whatever the number you are going to get, if you assume that it will never be negative, then it will never be negative, then you have an assertion. Therefore, if you have assumption, then if you want to test the assumption, then you could use the assertions enable. Therefore, assertion is a statement in Java that is to test the assumptions you made. Therefore, if you want to execute, if you want to enable the assertions, you need to pass a special message to the Java virtual machine. That is only for the assertions are used only for the test your assumptions. Assertions are used to test the assumptions you made. Right, assertions are used to test the assumptions you made. Right, now let's see how to have assertion and see. Right, now let's see. Right, okay, let's get back to the main method here. Let's say now here we have right now, let's say we have an value, let's say integer x. Okay, age equals like let's say we are taking this in as an input, like let's assume, okay, let's take it then. Scanner s equals new scanner system.in. Let's say you are taking for age equals to age is equals to scanner.nextInt. Let's say you assume that the age would be always greater than 18. Therefore, if you want to check the assumption, you can have assert age greater than or equals to 18. Right, then we're going to have assertion message, not eligible, not eligible. Right, now let's say not eligible. Right, now then semicolon, and also let's display the age variable as well. And if you just run this, then assertion is not enabled. Therefore, this would display the age. Right now, this would be waiting for user to enter the age value. Let's say now this would display age right now. No matter what you enter, it would display right now. Let's say 15. Right now, if you enter 15, now you can read this display 15. Right now, if you want to enable this assertion, then you can right click and select properties and go to the run, and under VM options, if you pass enable assertion -EA, enable assertions, and then if you enable the assertions, and then if you run this, okay, then you have to run from here, from the project, main project, I think, not from right click and run file, won't do this. Right, then It is 15, yes, right. Okay, now in order to get this thing done, you need to run from here because now in the project properties you have changed to enable the assertion. Therefore, you have to run from the project here. Now, what it says, couldn't find a load main class. From my here project. Okay, now let's change the main class also. Properties or run main class is now it should be the test. Right. Okay, let's give it as test and then next one. Now you have to enter the value. Then you can see we have give the 15 because we have assumed assumption is this age is always greater than 18. Therefore, now since you have 15, now it gives us the assumption saying assertion error not eligible. That is because of we have enabled the assertion. If you want to enable the assertion, remember we have to go to run and then under VM options you need to type minus EA or enable assertions. Right, EA is for enable assertion. Right now by default this is disabled. Therefore, if you do not enable this, therefore nothing will happen for the code and nothing will happen because by default assertions are disabled. Right, let me run it from here even. Right. Therefore, this one, right now, basically we use the assert or the assertions just to test the assumptions. See, now 15 won't give anything because assertion disabled. If you enable the assertion, then only that would get enabled minus EA. Remember, after enabling, you need to run from the here. Then only it would be applied. Then if you type 15, now assertion will get assertion error will get thrown. Right. Right. Now, if it is 48, you can see nothing will happen, right? Okay, then any questions you can ask them. If you have any questions, please ask. That's how we use exceptions. That's how we use assertions. Any questions you can ask them, please. If you have no questions, then we'll wind up today. Thank you very much. And then make sure you come next week. You show me your project progress because 30th is going to be the last day to submit. Right. Thank you. And next day we'll be doing another practical session as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
yes.